Bum, 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 bum.
Kilted
Kilted
Balls.
Balls.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Kilted Balls podcast. I seriously think our theme song gets better and better every time we do it.
I
So
am
that's
I'm
awesome.
surprised that we're not getting taps for being jingle makers.
You know, who was it? Was it Jesse Itzler? Who that's how he started? He just did jingles for like all the
Oh
NFL
yeah.
teams.
Yes.
That could be us.
He
People could
was
be like,
talking
oh
about
my gosh, you guys make the best jingles, best theme show songs
that.
ever. Which I
Yeah.
was thinking today, just as like a quick circle back for people. We talked to a few people when we were at the VCon about our
Mhm,
podcast and what it
mhm.
was, and they loved the idea. But I was thinking today, we don't talk about the idea of our podcast very much. And so I kind of just wanted to, excuse me, refresh that.
I think
And,
that's a great start.
well, and it's just like, here's the deal, people, especially our newer listeners that are joining us. Kilted and I are really firm believers that you don't think about what ifs. You don't let fear kind of rule things. You just do things. And this
Hmm.
podcast, in part, like there's a lot of purposes to it, but in part is meant to show that you can just do stuff. So our podcast is made without editing, without a script, without like anything. It we literally get online and we go. We don't do a theme song, and we know we could, right? We know
Hmm.
how to make the fancy backgrounds. We know how
Hmm.
to use our good audio equipment. We're we can do a professional podcast, but it defeats the point of what we're trying to say, which is that if you want to do something, just do it. You can fix things later,
Hmm.
right? Like you can fix it later
Like
and
if
make it
we,
good.
yes, if we get to a point where it's like, besides using it for ourselves and for our listeners, and we hope people do gain from it,
Mhm.
and we decide, okay, we really want it. We want to get a lot more listeners now. So
Yeah.
these are the things that we need to do. We know how to do those things,
Yes.
but that's not the most important thing to us.
No, it's not. And I think it's important to show people that you
Hmm.
literally can just do whatever it is. Like you can just do it.
Hmm.
And that's part of the
Yep.
thing is that you just get into it. A great example of that for me today is my girls were sitting in the room here with me. I don't
Uh-huh.
even remember what we're talking about. I'm like, hey, listen to this video. And like my one daughter's like, oh my gosh, it's 2 minutes, right? They're in the TikTok culture.
Hmm.
Well, I'm like, yeah, suck it up, 2 minutes. And so it was about making AI apps. And it was a
Hmm.
contest, $1,000 grand prize, 250. And I'm like, look at that. You can do that. It takes no coding. You can just do that. And I spent like the next 30 minutes and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm making an AI app. And
Hmm.
they're like, do you know how to do that? I'm like, I have no freaking clue what I'm doing at all.
I'm just doing
I
it.
you and that's one of our firm beliefs that you just
Hmm.
do the thing. So it's a little different. Like Gary V will always talk about, hey, you need to put in, a bajillion hours of research, but that's different than what we're talking about. We're talking
Hmm.
about you go and you do the thing. You don't let fear of doing it hold you back. You don't let being perfect hold you back. My one
Hmm.
daughter, the daughter who right now is getting all the accolades as she graduates, she's a perfectionist. She knows that. And just recently we were talking and I forget what it was she was doing. And she's like, it's just hard for me because I really want it to be perfect before I
Hmm.
do it. And she goes, I'm
A
trying
lot of
really
people are like that.
hard to just do it and not worry about it being perfect. And I'm like, yes, just do the thing. Make it
But
perfect later.
finally. Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
make it perfect later.
And that's huge. Actually, it's so funny. Like, yeah, if you noticed, I was chuckling earlier when you started
Mm-hmm.
that because Carmen has a new boyfriend, and we had a chance to meet him.
Oh,
I like him a lot. He's a really cool guy. And if you're listening, and that's hard. I'm not just saying that if Jabrice turns this on. But anyways, we are talking, and I don't like I don't like asking people what they do because that's a lot of like, not from myself, but a lot of judgment can come from that from people like, oh, what do you do?
yes,
So
yes.
So I was like, hey, are you doing something that you are planning on doing the rest of your life? Are you doing something that you love, or are you still figuring out life? Because he's a younger guy. I think he's 23.
Right, for
So
sure.
he's like, well, I'm not doing something that I love. I'm kind of figuring things out. He's like, I'm a huge people person. I love people. I love football. I love this. I love that. So he's saying a few things, and I go, oh, what's the name of your podcast? And he's
Right.
like, what? I'm like, well, you have all these things that you love and that you love to talk about, and you love people. Like, what's your podcast? Are you talking to people? Like, what are you doing? Like, what are your handles out there, and things like that. So that was just kind of, and I hope it like just planted that little seed. Like, you can, just like you said, you can do anything. And then
Yes.
depending on what you want out of it, what you want to do, you can make it better. You can make it as perfect as you can if that's what you choose to do. But yeah, I hope it planted a little seed. I really like him. I'm looking forward to getting to know him a bit better.
Heck yeah. And here's the thing. Almost everybody, almost everybody I know. So that's not everybody in the world, obviously, but I know a lot of people. But almost everybody I know, when they were little, they just did stuff. They just did
Mm-hmm.
stuff like they got on, like in our day, it was the cassette recordings, right? And they would
Mm-hmm.
get on there and they would just sing, and they didn't
Mm-hmm.
care if it sounded good or if it didn't. And you would run up and you would tell people jokes and you didn't care. You would go make a lemonade stand, or like my girls, I'm going to sell bracelets. Like you'd never cared
Mm-hmm.
about whether it would work or not. You were just like, I have a great idea and I'm going to go. Now, part of
Mm-hmm.
that's because you don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex,
Mm-hmm.
so you can't visualize the failure. My argument, and yours as well, is you kind of need to go back to that point. Like, shut
Mm-hmm.
off that prefrontal cortex and not worry about that failure. Like, it actually doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which brings up an interesting, complete side note here that I've got two or three things I want to talk about today, and they were inspired by Coffee with the Captain Twitter space.
Okay.
So for people who've been around for a while and people who know me, like I'll do random things. Like we've talked about, I listen to the universe, and it's not that way, right? Like I'm not sitting here meditating and the universe
Mm-hmm.
talks to me. It's more like I feel like, ooh, I should do this, and I do the thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about it. I don't go, ooh, I wonder if I should do this or if I should do this. If I get an urge to do something, I do the thing and I don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I trust those, people would say, those gut feelings.
Yes.
I say it's my instinct, right? Like I've got enough training and enough experience that my subconscious knows things. And so today I'm like, I got up earlier before the house. And I'm kind of like, you know what? I should check a few of my Twitter feeds today and see what's going on. And I'm
Yeah.
checking out this one, and there's a Twitter space going on, and it's Coffee with the Captain. And I'm like, oh. And normally I scroll right by Twitter spaces, right? I'm sure you
Mm-hmm.
do as well. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, there's something about this. I'm going to click it. So
Mm-hmm.
I click it and I start listening in, and it's freaking fantastic. Like I don't
Nice.
know if it's the day I tuned in. I don't know if this is the normal space. I think at the height when I was listening, it had 200 people in the spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely a big amount of bored apes,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm like, okay. And so I'm like listening to this guy, and one of the things he talked about, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that he kind of talked about. What was his name? His handle is like Captain Zwing, I think, or something.
Okay.
Okay, so it's like Captain Zwing or Captain Zwingli. I'll have to look it up. I'll put it in the description of this, people. I always forget to do that. Today I'm going to remember. But one of the things he talked about was, he really wants to make memories. There's a couple things I want to hit on today, but
Mm-hmm.
one of them was like with his family, he wanted to make memories, and they were on like a Disney cruise, and he went up there and he did karaoke. And he
Mm-hmm.
was like, like I wanted to make that memory. And he goes, and people are so worried about that stuff, and they're worried about what people think. And he goes, and before he talked about that, he was going off on Mesopotamia, right? So he's like talking about Mesopotamia, and he's like, they did this, and they did this, and they did this, and they're famous for this, and they're famous for this, and they're famous for this wonder of the world, and blah 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 blah. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, I'm asking you right now. He goes, I'll give you a prize. Name 10 Mesopotamians.
So did you win the prize?
No, I'm like, I have no idea what you're even talking about, right? I don't even know who the Mesopotamians
I was thinking maybe
are.
Civ helped you out there or
No,
something.
no. Well, and that's it. And he's like, nobody knows. He goes, nobody knows any Mesopotamians. He goes, it was one of the greatest empires in history. And he
Mhm.
goes, and unless you study Mesopotamia, you have no freaking clue of them. He goes, what you do right now, everything you do right now, nobody's going to know in 200 years. He's like, stop worrying about it. He goes, if all those people
Mhm.
on the cruise laugh at me, first off, he goes, I probably won't ever see them again. Second, nobody's going to remember that. He goes, if you think back to high school, he goes,
Mhm.
a lot of things that you thought were really important, probably don't remember. And I'm like laughing because I'm like, I seriously have friends or girlfriends or all sorts of stuff that I don't even remember their names anymore. Like we've
Mhm.
talked about that because I go through so many people in my life that eventually I
Mhm.
get to a spot where I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like those names got purged along the way.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. And so it was just like going right back to what you said, what we're talking about. Like, you
Mhm.
do the thing, do the thing.
Yeah.
If you're passionate about football, Joe does a really good job of that, right? Like,
Mhm.
Joe's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to make a podcast. Like,
Mhm.
that guy needs to. And don't worry, like, right now, right? People could be judging us all the time
Yep.
and whatever.
And you could we get nasty things written in the comments or whatever, but who cares? Like Gary says, Susie Pants 58. Who
Right.
cares?
And he said that. He actually quoted Gary. He was like,
Mhm.
as
Oh,
Gary
did he?
says, you're all gonna
Hmm.
die. Stop
Hmm.
worrying about it. It's all gonna go away. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting there thinking, I'm like, okay, what do you remember from 200 years ago? Like we still remember people. They still had an
Hmm.
effect. But do
Hmm.
you remember anything anecdotally about those people?
Yeah.
Like
I mean, we
unless
all
you're
know
reading
about
their
Alexander
biography.
Hamilton now because of Lin-Manuel.
Right? And otherwise, unless you read that biography, you had no clue.
Hmm.
Right? You just believed whatever anybody said. So that was kind of one of the big things. The other thing that was really interesting to me, and I thought, oh man, this is a new kind of a topic for us.
Hmm.
We talk a lot on the podcast. I'm so interested in your take on this because there's two spots where this went because I talked to
Oh,
Amy about it
nice.
and it went two spots. But the first thing was is we talk a lot about kindness,
Hmm.
right? And being kind to people and blah blah blah. And one of the things I think we forget about, we've talked about it a little bit, but never, I think, directly. But when we're talking about showing kindness to people, you need to show kindness to you too,
Oh, yes.
right? A lot of people have trouble with that. They're not kind to themselves. We talk about
Hmm.
it as we talk about positive self talk and negative self talk,
Hmm.
but just in general, like, give yourself a little grace. Like I used to tell
Yeah.
teachers that during like COVID, I'm like, give yourself grace. You've been through a really hard time. It's okay to be in pain and be suffering, right?
Hmm.
And we tell people to take a moment, but I don't think in general people do that. I think they beat themselves up a lot.
I mean, coming from that in my past, I can see it's a huge thing. Like it's something that happens a lot.
It is. And you need to be kind and not just like the talk or anything else, right?
Hmm.
But
Not just that.
like if you want ice cream one day, get the ice cream. Like
Hmm.
I'm not saying you should go on a binge of eating ice cream every night, though in all
Hmm.
honesty, I'm a pretty firm believer that you can eat whatever you want all the time and you'll just get tired of ice cream and stop eating it. Right?
Yeah.
Listen to what your
Hmm.
body wants and it'll
Yeah.
tell you. Right? But I think you've got to be good to yourself too, right? Like
Hmm.
one of the things that's always been part of my relationship and like a lot of people, like I remember telling my wife at times, like, I can't believe you let him do this, is I tend to game a lot at night, right? You
Hmm.
obviously know this because we game a lot at night, but I always
Hmm.
have, right? I've
Yeah.
always gamed and I would come home from coaching or whatever, and I would game for another couple hours. And people would
Mhm.
say to like my wife, how do you like let him do that? And she's like, well, like as if she had control, right?
Yeah, yeah,
She's like, why would I be mad about that? He's not at the bar. He's not
yeah.
out smoking. Like he's in the house and he's playing the game for an hour. He's not watching football all Sunday. Like his thing is,
That was an argument that I when I had to stick up for you at times
yeah,
because people in my life being judgmental, like, yeah, he's or like when we were like during COVID when we started playing a
yes,
lot together because I didn't play games for a long time except
no,
like on my phone here and there. But I was like, well, I'm not out drinking. I'm not out partying and who knows what. I'm sitting in the living room or I'm sitting in my office,
where I can still
where I
talk to
am.
you and I can still
Yeah.
be a part. Like I
Yeah.
can still do stuff. I'm not like
Hmm.
separated. Right. And the other thing was that she would tell people, she's like, this is his decompression time. Like you
Hmm.
can't run at that. She goes, he runs at such a high level, like
Hmm.
it's so high octane, he has to come down. She goes, and
Hmm.
whether he knows it or not, that's how he calms
Yeah.
himself down.
Yeah.
Which I was like,
Well, that's
oh,
why you
that's
have an
pretty well.
amazing wife.
Right. Well, and she thinks about that kind of stuff and is like, and she would make comments sometime, right? Like I'd be
Hmm.
like, why am I
That's we're all
like, why am I
human.
not getting any action? And she goes, well, because your dumbass doesn't come to bed till midnight every night. All right, that's fair. That's a fair point. So if I go to bed tonight at 9, nope. I'm
Yeah.
like, ah. She goes, you're making choices.
That's hilarious. It's
No.
so funny that you're saying this because one of the things that I had in my mind that we could possibly talk about was self-esteem because it came up a lot. Like I'm seeing it in my YouTube feed, I'm seeing it in my Twitter feed, and just like I don't often have the volume on when I'm scrolling, but sometimes
Hmm.
I do. And I can't tell you how many times this week that I heard people talking about self-esteem and working on self-esteem and just like and that's part of being kind to yourself is working
It
on that.
is.
Like if you're beating yourself up all the time, your self-esteem is gonna not be great.
Yeah. So in this episode, they did not talk about being kind to yourself.
No.
But what they did talk about a lot is you've got to care for yourself. So when I
Hmm.
clicked it on, the very first thing they were talking about when I clicked it on, however many minutes in the episode,
Hmm.
35, 40 minutes, they were talking about how important it is to get sleep. Right. And so they're like, people
Hmm.
think you need to just go, 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 and you need to rest, you need to have downtime.
Hmm.
And that's really, really important. And then they talked about, it's really important to take care of yourself and to work out. And I'm sitting here thinking, you've got to be kind to yourself. You've got to
Hmm.
be kind. And so I'm like, oh, they're talking about that. They don't know that's what they're talking about, but they're talking about
Yeah.
being kind. And that's why I was like, oh my gosh, I want to talk about it. But it brings up this next point. During that, they're like, yeah, like people, especially young people, don't understand. You got to rest. And the guy's like, yeah. And he goes, I think it was the captain talking. It might have been somebody else. And they're
Hmm.
like, yeah, I didn't do that at all when I was younger. And they're like, yeah. They're like, but if you didn't go 24/7 when you were younger, then you would feel like you had regret all the time and you'd be anxious that you weren't using every minute to its full potential. And by going through all of that, now you have the ability to now take the time and
Mm.
do that. They're like, so they're like, yeah, you need to rest. And young people don't think about that. But we couldn't do that either. Like, we wouldn't have been able to. They're like, we're in our position right now doing this because we didn't do that.
Hmm.
And that brought up the conversation, the second kind of part of this, which was okay, we were talking about like this generation and different generations going
Hmm.
through. And like our generation has always been like, at least our peers
Hmm.
have always been like, go, 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 rest.
Hmm.
Go, 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 rest. And we've been big on that all the time.
Yeah.
And she was like, my wife was feeling that the younger generation now is listening to the part about needing rest. And they're
Hmm.
like, you've got to have rest. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to do this. And they're forgetting that the counterpoint of that is work, 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 work,
Hmm.
go, 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 go. And so they're missing that message they're getting peppered with all the time on TikTok and everything else, like take time for yourself, relax, do this.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, and they're missing the other portion of this, which is the other 8 hours you're going balls to the wall.
Yeah.
And
When
now,
you're working, whether it's it's a job for yourself or you're working for somebody else. And I talk about that a lot, even with Tristan. And I think back to when I was younger, like people used to laugh at me when I worked at Meyer. They're like, "Why are you doing this?" Like, what was it then? 4.25 an hour, I
yeah,
think was minimum
yeah,
wage. But I'd work my ass off because I was there to work. That was my job. So when I was there, I wasn't dicking around, and a lot of people did. They're like, "Oh, blah blah blah," and I was often cleaning up other people's messes. But that just it was just it came from I don't know where. I don't know if it came from my mom talking about it. I don't ever remember conversations, but I can remember seeing how they worked when they worked,
yeah.
and just like I don't know. I'm glad it's something that I had in me to where it's not like when it's work time, it's time to work.
Well, and I think like for me, we were kind of talking about this today, like
Hmm.
growing up on the farm,
Hmm.
there was always something to do. And so they were always like, go do this, go do this, go
Hmm.
do this. We were talking about last night, actually, how like one of my chores every day, and I'm like, I can't believe this was the norm. And she's like, maybe that was just your family. I'm like, all of my siblings did it. All of my friends who lived on farms did this. I go, so it was literally the norm. And I don't understand it, but we would carry 5 gallon buckets of water to water the animals. And so for like me, I would always carry 2 5 gallon buckets of water.
Hmm.
That was the norm. Like I would just carry 2 5 gallons a bucket. And I'm like even as big as I am right now, I would not even dream of that. I would go get a cart and a wagon and I'd put the 2 5 gallon buckets in it and wagon it where I wanted to go. Or I would just buy more hose
Hmm.
and run a hose longer. I'm
Hmm.
like, so what the heck was possessing us to just use buckets and carry it? I don't know. And I'm like, Mike Ash always did that. Like I
Hmm.
always watched him carrying buckets.
Hmm.
I'm like, that was just a thing. You just did that.
Yeah.
And if you go to the fairgrounds and you watch the animal people, they're all carrying buckets around.
Hmm.
I'm like, that's so weird. Like, but going back to the farm, like that's you just had things to do and you just did the
Hmm.
things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that was never an option to not do the thing.
Hmm.
You
I
just
think it
did.
makes sense because it keeps you busy for longer. That's why they had you do it
They
like that.
probably did, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody did. Get out of the house, go do this. Well, and like the kids are always like, did you do like a lot outside? I'm like, oh my gosh, we were like constantly outside doing
Hmm.
stuff. They're like, oh, because you probably didn't have electronics. No, because if we were sitting there was always work to do.
Hmm.
So if I was caught near an adult, they would give me a job to do. And you just
Hmm.
did the job, right? Like they said, go do this and you did the job. Like there was no
Hmm.
arguing about it,
Yeah.
except for maybe cleaning my room. But
Yeah.
otherwise, you did the job. So if I could go like hang out in the barn for a few hours
Hmm.
as at 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old, I'm going to go do that
Yeah.
versus, hey,
Where you're
go
not getting
split
assigned a
wood for
bunch of
two
jobs.
hours, right? Like there's always stuff. So, hey, go
Hmm.
weed the garden, right?
Yeah.
But so, yeah, that's, and you're probably seeing it with Tristan and, Carmen,
Hmm.
but like that's something that we're kind of noticing. Like sometimes our kiddos, maybe not ours, but our the kiddos that we see, they're not into like the work. They're like
Hmm.
chill. And I'm like, you're kind of missing the big point of this.
Yep.
The other, you've gone too far. The pendulum is swung too far.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, taking care of yourself is definitely important, but yeah, it also depends what you're trying to do.
a friend just recently said this to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, dur. But they were
Hmm.
like, yeah, that's why you believe in the Kinavata.
Hmm.
They're like, you believe it should all be in balance. I'm like, I do. I really think it should all be in balance.
Hmm.
And I go, and I think like I have one daughter who I think doesn't work enough. She says she does, right? Maybe
Hmm.
she does. I don't know. I don't
Hmm.
try to judge, especially
Hmm.
my own family. But I worry that she doesn't. And my worry is not that she's not working enough, that things aren't getting done or whatever. My worry is that she's not going to be fulfilling her best self because
Yeah.
she's spending time reading or watching movies or watching YouTube or whatever,
hmm
instead of doing something productive. Like being productive has good feelings with it. You
Yes,
get
it
good
does.
feelings with being
hmm
productive. And you're making yourself in a bad spiral by not being productive.
hmm
So that's my like worry, not because I think they should work more, but I think again, the kin of a dot, right? I think that's a
Yep.
balance.
There is a
Um,
balance.
yeah. And another one who talked about like getting out there and doing things to be kind to yourself was a speaker called Outer Lumen. She works with, is it Yugi Labs? Yuga Labs?
Okay, Yuga Labs.
Thank you, Yuga Labs. I always mess that up. She's one of their people. I kind of remember when she got hired, but she had some comments on this, and I was just loving her comments because of stuff that happened in her childhood. She was like a born singer. Her dad was a famous singer.
hmm
And because of some trauma, she never sang for people.
Okay.
And she was sitting there like, I don't know, 25, 30 or something. And she's like, I'm gonna be 80, 84, and be this person who people are like, oh my gosh, you have this beautiful singing voice.
hmm
Why don't you ever sing? And she's like, and I'm gonna feel tons of regret that I wasted my life not doing that.
hmm
And she's like, so right then I made the decision. And it's again that power of you making a decision of verbalizing it. She went to open mic night. She grabbed a ukulele
That's awesome.
and she's like, I did it and I got done and I couldn't stop shaking for an hour. Like I couldn't even hold a
hmm
glass of water. She goes, and I did it the next open mic night and I did it again. She goes, to the point where the pendulum swung the other way
hmm
and I had no feeling at all. And I was like, I need to fix this
hmm
because, she goes, but now, like, she goes, I wanted to be that person who sings that around a campfire and
hmm
does this, but I was so worried about it. And I was like, this is stupid. What am I worried for?
Yeah.
And she goes, the other one that happened is I like, and again, talking about how dumb it is, the things we hold on from our childhood.
hmm
She dove into a pool, the goggles went around her neck, and everybody laughed at her. So
hmm
she would never dive.
Oh wow.
And she's
Yeah,
watching her
those little
kids.
things.
Yeah, those little itty bitty things. And she's watching her kids learn how to dive. And she's like, I could do that. And then she's like, why don't I do that? And then she's like, oh, I've been being held back by little kid memories. She goes, and so I got up and I started diving.
That's awesome.
It's like I made the decision and I went with it. And I just loved how she talked. So she was like Outer Lumen. And I was like, oh my gosh, lady, you are terrific.
I
But
might have to keep an eye out for that. Captain,
yes, yes.
Coffee with the Captain.
Coffee with the Captain.
That
It's at
sounds
8
familiar. I
o'clock.
think I've seen it before.
And again, this could have totally been a random, just really good episode,
hmm
right? But I thought it was fantastic, that one. And it hit a lot of things that we talked about.
That's
So,
awesome.
and then it spurred a conversation, right? Like, I'm like,
hmm
what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And then I'm like, yeah, what about this? What about this? What about the kids? What about, and it was just like, zzz. So it was like, it was awesome.
hmm
Yeah. So I guess other thoughts? I've been talking a lot.
No, I thought it was awesome. Well, like I said, the big thing that I didn't have a ton to talk about this week, but it was funny that we ended up working into it anyway. So it just goes back to it, and I did see a news story that it's scientifically proven people can be on the same wavelength. So I don't ever read articles. I just read the headlines.
Oh my gosh. Speaking about AI, I found an
Mhm.
AI today
Yeah.
that you tell it things about yourself so it knows who you are.
hmm
And then you just tell it to summarize the article and it tells you what you want to know from the article.
That is
And
awesome.
so it's like put in the link of the article you want. And I'm like, is this going to be real? And so I like just went to a local newspaper
Uh-huh.
and I picked an article that I wouldn't read, but would have
hmm
been interesting. I just copy and pasted the link into my AI bot and it was like, brrr. And I was like, wow. It was like, here's what it's about. Here's 5 bullet points. Here's possible solutions. I was like, high five. Like I didn't have to
That's
read the
awesome.
article or like you
Uh-huh.
just did it for me. I'm like, that's sweet.
That's really cool.
I know. I was like, oh man, AI is going to be messing things up.
hmm
Um, So I talked last episode that I got an offer on my 4 unit.
Yes.
Speaking about the universe talking to us and like
Mhm.
all that stuff. I had a thing like the capital investors wanted to take a tour of the place, right?
Mhm.
And let me tell you, people, it is well lived in. My tenants have been living there. The oldest one, I think, moved in 2011,
Yeah.
maybe 2012. The youngest one is like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe
Mhm.
6. So people have been there for a while, and that place is lived in. If you can
Mhm.
imagine your house, if you've been living there for 10 or 12 years, they
Yeah.
get lived in pretty damn quick. So, it's a mess. That's a nice way of saying it's a mess. And so I like take them on a tour, and I called my wife after, and she's like, "Hey, how did it go?" And I'm like, "Yeah, pretty good." And she's like, were they like wanting to leave it? Did they like it? And I'm like, it's really hard. I go, I don't know if they were in love with the place or if they were in love with me.
Yeah.
And she's like, really? And I'm like, well, they like asked how I was doing things, why I wasn't raising rent, why I did this, why I did that. And I'm just like telling them my philosophies on everything.
Mhm.
And they're like, we love your philosophy. We love how you do this. We love how you run this. We want to do things that way too.
That's awesome.
And they're like, why are you selling? The first thing they ask, like, I'm showing them in, and they're like, they've all been here forever. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And they're the people who are there, like, oh, hey. And we're like walking through, and they're like, so why do you want to sell this? And I'm like, I don't want to sell it. I'm like, you guys came to me and asked if I would be willing to sell it.
Uh-huh.
And I said, yes, I'm willing to sell it.
Mhm.
I go, don't confuse that with me having a desire and want to sell it.
Yeah.
I go, that's not how I operate. That's not how I work. And like by the end of it, they were like, yeah, we totally get it. Like if something happens, it happens. I go, that's how I live my
Mhm.
my life, especially in real estate. If it's
Yeah.
meant to be, it'll happen. If it's not
Mhm.
meant to be, it won't. And I don't force things and I don't try them. I go, you guys have an accepted offer. I go, if you were ticked off today and didn't want to buy it, I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah.
I go, and if you're go through it and you're like, yeah, we want to buy it, I'm okay with that too. Like it's a win-win for me. Like I can't lose in this.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of how I like live my life most of the time. I'm like, I'm pretty happy no matter which option you choose because I don't invest those kind of feelings with the
Yeah.
options.
In that situation, especially happiness is the choice. Like you it's not a perspective thing there. That is happiness
No,
is the choice.
that is choosing happiness, right?
Uh-huh.
Like I'm choosing to say it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like I could say, oh no, I've got to sell it, I've got to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm choosing to not think that way.
Yeah.
Like that's not the way it is. So anyway, people,
I love it.
we hope you really enjoyed the episode. We hope we gave you things to think about, things to approach. Give us some comments,
Mm-hmm.
give us some thoughts on what your take is of this. And remember, we love you guys truly and
Yes.
dearly. So this is Ballbuster signing off.
Kill the Dragon Jair. Love you all.